So this exhibition, this panel discussion, Copyright as Frame in Prison, is largely about the themes surrounding the exhibition, but also just in general how we as artists, as people who know about copyright, come into contact with and collision with and conflict with copyright in our day-to-day lives, practices and jobs. So yeah, I'll introduce the panel, well, say who they are, at least that they can introduce themselves afterwards. So we've got Francis Clark, organiser of the Birmingham Open Rights Group, Nicola Ellis, who is one of the artists behind the other Nefertiti artwork, and Lisa Beauchamp, curator at Birmingham Museum and Art Gallery. And yeah, and again, I'm Antonio Roberts. So firstly, just a little introduction, just from me, about the exhibition itself. So the themes really started from like my growing up as being on the internet and like being a digital native or millennial, coming into contact with lots of different media and never really intentionally thinking about where it's come from, who's uploaded it, where, and things looking similar. And it wasn't until, I guess, kind of people started uploading things en masse to YouTube that I started to think about, well, the copyright holders of this artwork, of this media, what do they have to say about it? And I'd often see this phrase, no copyright intended or no copyright infringement intended, as captions on YouTube videos. And to me that really just spoke about how there's a bit of a disconnect between the law itself and what we understand about the law. Because as artists, as human beings living, as soon as we make kind of marks on page, as soon as we create a piece of artwork, we suddenly unlock this copyright law, which is there to protect us and to give us rights about how we distribute our artwork and who can sell it and use it. But to be quite frank, I don't really understand it. And I'm sure many of the artists out there do not as well. And that knowledge, or that lack of knowledge, can sometimes be exploited by other artists and by corporations. And so in this exhibition, not all of the works are directly linked to copyright. Some of them deal with issues around ownership and authorship, but still, it's all related, and the internet has changed that. Essentially, it's accelerated a lot of the things that we've already done. Copyright infringement and plagiarism has existed long before the internet, but the internet allows it to happen at such an accelerated pace that we're all still figuring it out. And yeah, so through this presentation, panel discussion, we're not necessarily looking to provide concrete answers, but well, our own opinions hopefully can set us some issues, but also maybe raise some questions for everyone else here. Yeah, cool. So we're going to start then with that introduction, which I just did, and then everyone's going to have a bit of a 5-minute introduction to their thoughts and feelings behind everything. We're going to talk for about an hour until maybe about 7:30, have a bit of a break, and then open up for discussion from everyone here. And then we'll go upstairs to view the exhibition if you haven't already done so, and then maybe we'll go for a pint. So, yeah. First then, I'd like to just introduce Francis Clark, and if you could maybe give an introduction about your thoughts and feelings behind the exhibition.
Thank you very much, Antonio. Really excellent introduction. So, my name is Francis Clark, and I'm here tonight in my capacity as the local organiser for the Open Rights Group in Birmingham. And for those of you who perhaps aren't familiar with the Open Rights Group, we're the UK's only grassroots digital rights campaigning organisation. And again, let me sort of break that down for you. So essentially, digital and rights, so what does that mean? We're interested in digital technology and the fact that, as Antonio says, the internet and technology more generally is changing at a very rapid pace. I think we can all agree that. We hear cliches about everything going digital, but it's true. And we at the Open Rights Group are technologists, we're passionate, we're, if not digital natives, I'm maybe a few years older. We certainly live our lives increasingly on the internet, and what the Open Rights Group says, in essence, is that your rights should go with you online. So when you go online, the same rights that you have in the real world, IRL, should apply online, and that includes copyright, which I'll get to. So in a nutshell, we're always looking at technology and the impact of technology on us as human beings, and us as a collection of human beings, our society, whether that's here in Digbeth, Birmingham, West Midlands, the UK, and the world, and beyond, wherever that might be. And as I said, so we're interested in technology from the point of view, how is it transforming how we live our lives, and both the positives and oftentimes the not so positive dimensions of how technology is used. So I think probably all of us in this room probably get a lot from our our phones, using the internet, searching for GIFs. I love Antonio's glitch work, for instance. But the dark side is that when we go online increasingly, corporations and governments are infringing on our rights to privacy and our rights to freedom of expression. So that's a right to be able to access lawful information, basically, about a variety of topics, even to controversial topics, and then to express ourselves online. And you only have to switch on the news most nights, and you hear someone like Amber Rudd or Theresa May in the government saying about we need to take action against the internet. Extremists use the internet, shock horror. The extremists use the bus. Extremists use cars. And so at the Open Rights Group, we're trying to say that we want to make sure that we harness the benefits of technology, but we also have a system of law and rules and expectations that protect us when we're online. And how does that apply to copyright? Well, copyright, as Antonio mentioned, the original idea is to provide an incentive for creators to create things. And if you go back sort of 200 plus years to the US founding of the United States and the US Constitution, they talk about copyright in relation to the progress of science and the arts. So often when you get into discussions about copyright, I take photographs and photographers will say, it's my livelihood, it's my bread and butter. That's true, but copyright is a stimulus for society. It's about the progress of ideas, not necessarily the ability for the individual to live off of their work forever. It's not Cliff Richard's pension fund, if you follow. And again, we can get into that. So keep that in mind. It's a balance. It's saying we give you a limited and defined set of rights to exploit your creative works. And oftentimes with artists, it's about handing those rights to another entity, whether that's a gallery, record label in the past. A script writer might sell their script to Disney, for instance. So you've got those rights for a certain amount of time in order to exploit it and get the benefit. But crucially, but this is what I want to get across tonight, a healthy society and a healthy culture, just like the privacy and freedom of expression rights, are on balance. In order for us to be able to participate in the culture Antonio described around the internet, we need to be able to access those things. And so if copyright ends up locking up or locking down culture for decades, life plus 70 years, we can get into some of the detail, but think about that. Anything we create and we post online, unless we go out of our way to give it over to the public domain, that's locked in. Okay, and you might say, well, that's great because I can make my millions from the photograph. But what about, let's say, after we're long dead, and there's a great photograph that Pete's taken that just represents the art scene in Digworth here in 2017. Now, Pete probably, I believe, uses Creative Commons, which is an alternative kind of form of copyright licensing, so that you can go ahead and use that picture. But the archivist, the museum wanting to represent what Birmingham was like in 2017, is going to really struggle because because of copyright rules, they'll have to prove to a very high degree, imagine getting lawyers involved, that you can use that picture. And unfortunately what happens, that creativity, that artwork in 90% plus of cases just gets lost. And we talk about orphan works. This particularly affects documentary makers, people who are doing collage, and some of the work we're going to look on today. So that gives you an idea. And I think if it was just to sum up, and I'm conscious of time, I don't want to outstay my intro, the original balance has been lost, and it's been brought into sharp relief by the internet. So the example America often quotes is the Mickey Mouse rule. Copyright just keeps extending, and you can track the life of Mickey Mouse, and Disney just keeps on getting its protections for its characters. And that's all been happening at the same time as the internet has enabled unheralded access to information, the Internet Archive, Wikipedia. And so there is this clash going on, and it's been just at the same time as entities are trying to sort of increase the corporatization and the control. The technology that should be liberating us is under threat. And just to show that this is a very sort of real and present danger, just at the moment, the EU is, under the guise of modernising copyright, is trying to bring in what they're calling a link tax, which means that even quoting snippets of a web page similar to Google News or a Twitter preview, you'll have to pay a license to do that. Now that'll work well for Facebook, Twitter, companies that are already set up, but what about the next Twitter? What about the next disruptive enterprise? What about the independent blogger who just wants to excerpt a piece of work? Secondly, they're talking about making illegal GIFs and memes, the internet culture that probably most of us take for granted. And again, the expectation, not only that you won't be able to use that, and I've got to be honest, that's probably highly unlikely that individuals will be sued, but the risk factor means that websites such as Wikipedia, such as GitHub, even software, will have to bring in mandatory filtering, so you'll have to prove before you upload something to YouTube that it doesn't infringe copyright, and that's a massive tool potentially for censorship and chilling of freedom of expression, because a corporation just probably doesn't want the hassle. If it's a choice between letting Antonio upload a cat gif or, nah, I'm good, thanks, I'll stick with the Justin Bieber video, they're probably stuck with the Justin Bieber video, and maybe we'll be all better for that, but who knows? Because those are some of the issues at play, and I just want to bring home to you, the balance has really been lost, but hopefully that gets a start. Is that all right?
Yeah, thank you very much. Nicola?
Yeah, I'm Nicola Nelles, and I'm here to present not only my own work, because my work derives from a collaborative work with my partner in crime, Nora Al-Badri, which couldn't be here. And I'm really thankful that you're here, because it's more like a sophisticated view on this digital rights aspect, and my aspect is more like an artistic approach, and in our work we form maybe you could frame it maybe more philosophical viewpoint or something like this. We are looking at how cultural institutions, and mostly public institutions, committing these copy frauds for artwork which are 3,000 years old. When they were created, there were no idea of copyright like this is a recent idea. And then in their process, they not only put copyrights on photographs of these items, but on the items itself, and especially on the digital derivatives from these items. So even on scans, and with our project Nefertiti hack, we tackled this issue by scanning the bust secretly, and as an act of piracy, if you want, and it was called also by the media as an ethical art haste. So it's not. It depends on the viewpoint if it's bad or not. But the museum, like Neue Museum in Berlin, they had obtained this data. They had scanned this particular bust, and they got hold on it for 9 years already, 7 years. I'm not, but for a long time. And so there's the idea where this institutional angst comes from, like what they fear. Like you don't lose if you share this data. Like, but there are, in principle, there are two reasons to this. Like, one is an economical reason, like to profit from this. This is really banal somehow. And on the other hand, we are talking about like an interpretational sovereignty, and this opens up a more broader discussion on where this bust comes from, or where these artifacts come from which culture. We are talking about Western museums, public institutions, which are these are like tax-funded institutions, and we as artists and taxpayers reclaim these institutions or these museums as a public space. So we have a word in it, and this word has to be spoken out loud. If not, they just continue with these, in the end, colonial continuities. And sorry, I'm terribly sorry that I'm not an English native speaker, so be okay with it. I just want to mention. And maybe to shorten it up, we could play a video, because Antonio was so lovely to bring a speaker. So, and it's just a short introduction to wrap it up in a certain way. And it's another copyright infringement, because BBC doesn't allow to play this, but it's fun.
Which one?
Yeah, it's yes.
Oh, exactly. Okay.
Now, there's a German equivalent of the Elgin marbles. It's the bust of the Egyptian queen Nefertiti, which sits in a museum in Berlin rather than in the vicinity of its creator.
So the bust of Queen Nefertiti is a 3,000-year-old work of art that was found in Egypt by German archaeologists
In 1912, who discovered the house and the workshop of the sculptor, a man named Sosa.
Currently, it's in a museum in Berlin with limited access to the public. Basically, there are no photos allowed. And for years, Germany and Egypt have fought over its rightful location, and the officials even claim that she was illegally stolen.
Now, the Egyptians would love to have that bust back, but the Germans have guarded it jealously, even banning photographs. So it is pretty amazing that two artists have succeeded in taking a full 3D scan of the bust. Here they are, secretly scanning back in October last year.
So two artists secretly 3D scanned the bust and released the files to the public as a free download. Although museums have already scanned Nefertiti's bust, they actually don't plan to make it public, which seems kind of backwards because there's a lot of museums around the world that are hosting scanathons. That's where they let people use their smartphones to take a bunch of pictures of things, objects, and to make 3D scans of them.
Now, it sounds a bit like Ocean's 11 or one of these movies. What I don't understand is, I mean, this thing is obviously guarded, right? And you must have been there for, what, a few hours? And how
Yes.
did you not get caught? I mean, how did you disguise yourself?
This is like pirate 3D printing, folks. So we thought we would download the file and 3D print it ourselves on our 3D printer. We're amazed just how much detail was captured in the model. I mean, every little crack, chip, and scratch is fully visible, which is no surprise because the mesh has a whopping 9 million polygons. It's so detailed that if you throw it in your...
It's just to give a glimpse, I mean, during the talk we can. I would love to bring some examples from our current project, which deals with dinosaurs. It's not now, we are looking not back 3,000 years where Nefertiti was created. We are looking now millions of years back where the dinosaurs comes from. And this looks more to on the one hand, like the scientific enterprise, which is running all scientific data and how these our hierarchies of knowledge are structured and got certain colonial biases in it. And on the other hand, we are looking how public institutions as the Natural History Museum in Berlin deals with data and responded to our, because we found the data again as a counteract to their argumentation. They found the data in southern Tanzania where all these dinosaur collection, like 250 tons of fossils, they obtained during colonial times, shortly after ending the Maji War, which was one of the bloodiest war fought by the Germans against almost every East African tribe. They, despite the fact that the people living there, like the communities, had like for centuries dealt with these bones and with these fossils and had like rituals and used them for healing purposes. And in the museum, in the display, it's only mentioned that German scientists found the data. So we found the data again, like the digital data. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And for Lisa, we'll just get your presentation loaded.
Yeah.
Okay. And yeah.
Okay, so I feel like the kind of evil one on the panel because I work in an institution. Boo, it's awful. I'm curator of modern and contemporary art at Birmingham Museum and Art Gallery. And I suppose my experience with copyright or infringement is kind of different because as you know, a modern and contemporary art curator, I'm mainly when I want to use an image to publicise one of my exhibitions, then we have to seek copyright. And so the whole kind of 70-year rule becomes this kind of mammoth thing. So, you know, we'll be in a meeting and then we go, oh, yeah, the artist is still alive, damn, we're going to have to get copyright. So, you know, it's one of the, you know, for me, it's a different kind of thing, really. But I titled my presentation Copyright or Copy Fight because it does feel a bit like that. It feels like this kind of battleground, and a battleground that feels really unsure and unsteady because it feels like things are always changing and we're always trying to keep up with all these changing copyright rules, really. So one of the works in the exhibition that really struck me when I went around the show was this work called Display at Your Own Risk, which is images of artworks, so artworks that are owned in collections in institutions, and the artists have kind of printed out these images from the institution's websites to scale as they would be if you went in a museum and saw the works. And some of them have these kind of watermarks and things, and they all have kind of rules and regulations about what you do if you download this image, you know, kind of, it had like high risk, medium risk and low risk. And it made me think, oh, well, that's really interesting because it almost kind of puts the onus on the individual, really. But working in an institution, I'm also aware of the risk to the institution as well. Because obviously, you know, we don't want to get sued for like billions because we haven't got any money. So, but it made me think about, you know, working at the Museum and Art Gallery. You know, one of our kind of online, I suppose, online sites is our Flickr page. And we're always uploading images of objects in our collection and also installation shots of exhibitions on Flickr. So I suppose similarly to this display at your own risk, you know, people can go on and they can download images and then almost do what they want with them. And you may have seen this exhibition, it was Night in the Museum that was on kind of last year, and putting on, I find interesting, putting on images of, you know, installation shots of exhibitions. I mean, all of these artworks are all in copyright, really. So there is a kind of risk to that. But I suppose there's a real delineation between, you know, putting on a kind of wide installation shot where the you know, the artworks that are in copyright are kind of in the background, and then perhaps, you know, maybe looking at this page and thinking, oh, that's a nice Patrick Coalfield. Oh, I like that. You know, what shall I do with that? Oh, I could zoom in and crop it, and then I could like print it out high res, and then maybe I could like, you know, sell it on my website or put it on the front of a book without telling anyone. So this is, you know, it's all about the use, and it's all about, you know, this kind of phrase of commercial gain. If you're going to get commercial kind of gain and money and kind of financial benefit from using the images and kind of downloading these, and that's when it becomes serious, really, and when people start to really care, when institutions care, because of course, you know, someone who has done that, or may, you know, I don't know if anyone has, hopefully not, but now I've suggested it, but you know, it does come back to the institution, and so the institution is liable. So you have to kind of bear these things in mind, really. So when Antonio was saying, you know, at the beginning, you know, that we don't really understand copyright, I thought, yeah, you know, today I was thinking, do I really understand copyright? So I did a bit of a Google, and I thought I'd just come up with these kind of very plain but boring facts that about the duration of copyright, because that's something that really impacts my work and probably, you know, your work as kind of artists as well. So the kind of rules are a literary, dramatic, musical, artistic and film works are all 70 years after the death of the author. So that is the duration that the copyright extends to. And sound recordings, broadcasts and cable programmes are 50 years. So it feels like there's quite, you know, this substantial duration that people have to check copyright for. But then it's interesting, so after those 70 years or 50 years ends, suddenly the copyright is kind of let loose and you don't need to check it. But actually, as an institution, the images, you know, the photographs we take of our collection, we still own those. So people should still be checking with us to use those works. And then this rather long text, which I found quite funny actually, about, I suppose, what you're talking about this fair dealing. So acts that do not infringe copyright. Fair dealing is a term used to describe acts which are permitted to a certain degree, normally copies of parts of a work, without infringing copyright. So I mean, it's this very kind of laborious, I mean, it's such a grey area, and it feels like these grounds are always kind of shifting. But in terms of, when we provide images, we don't charge for, if someone says, oh, can I have an image of Burne-Jones Pygmalion series? I'm like, yay, Burne-Jones is dead, so that's fine. But, so it's way out of copyright, but, we've taken photographs of those images and we own those works. So we don't charge for leasing out images for educational purposes, for example. So if you want to give a lecture, if you want to, use it to teach a school, that's absolutely fine. And it's all about, if you're putting it in a publication, but you're going to have, 50 copies, that's probably fine as well. But it's when it goes kind of mass worldwide, that's when it gets into other domains. And kind of charges, really. But it's also important to say that when, as an institution, when we want to get a copyright for a work, we have to pay for it as well. So it's finding this balance, really. So it's not like the institution is always charging. We do loads and loads of discounts, and, the money we make from, copyright is so minimal. But when other institutions are charging as well, it is, it's kind of fair practice, really. So I thought I would just talk briefly about a show that I worked on a couple of years ago called Love Is Enough, Andy Warhol and William Morris, curated by Jeremy Deller, and bring up our good old friend Andy Warhol, who I think presents a really interesting example when we think of copyright, because of course he was appropriating everything. There's flower images, the Campbell soup cans, the Marilyn Monroe images, looking at taking images from books for Jackie Kennedy. And now, after his death, we have this kind of huge nightmare that's called DAX and the Warhol Foundation, because they charge huge fees now for to get copyright for Warhol's work. So with this exhibition, it actually became, quite troublesome, really, because Andy Warhol was obviously, a key, the other key artist in the show other than William Morris, and it was really difficult to get copyright for his works, and it was difficult to publicise the Warhol kind of aspect of the show because we couldn't put any Warhol on social media. People couldn't take photographs in the exhibition at all. They probably did, but, they didn't have a tripod and they weren't kind of zooming in, so that was okay. But there's only so much you can do as an institution. So we did actually pay for one image of a Marilyn Monroe kind of rug that Warhol made for our kind of publicity poster, but we couldn't afford anything else, and we had to jump through huge hoops to get copyright for that. So, as you can see on the screen, Tate have clearly paid for that copyright, and they've got this lovely long kind of credit line to DAX and the Warhol Foundation. But often what you see when you try and see actual Warhol works online, just an example from the Arts Council collection down there, you obviously, they don't have images, so it's kind of like no copyright, so you can't view them. So what you get when you're looking online, a lot of Warhol works is just, sometimes it's just really bad copies that people, photos that people have taken in museums, or they shouldn't really be online, and sometimes they're not even Warhols. So you actually get this whole kind of other world of Warhol images circulating, which to me doesn't really kind of make sense. And so I just wanted to kind of end really by talking about, using Warhol as, I suppose, an example of this kind of real irony with copyright. So he obviously, so much appropriation in terms of, the Campbell soups, the Marilyns, the flowers, but he was also, the Warhol Foundation, whilst they're kind of cracking down on or charging very extortionate fees to people that want to kind of use Warhol images now, Warhol in his lifetime came up against kind of lawsuits and people trying to sue him and sue the Warhol Foundation for the work that he was producing, because of course he was appropriating so many existing works and actually works by other artists. So I think towards the end of his life he started to care about it, and there's two examples actually that are kind of quite well known. And so the Velvet Underground and how they lost their copyright claim over their kind of famous the Warhol cover, and then the Warhol estate kind of suing over a photograph of Prince, so a photograph taken by a photographer, and Warhol's appropriation of that. He was actually, another claim was against Warhol was for his Flowers series, and the photographer Patricia Caulfield, her photos of hibiscus flowers, she was trying to sue him and said, well, you've just copied my image, basically. So it was settled out of court, and I know with the Campbell's soup cans that Campbell's soup were maybe initially slightly miffed that he'd used them, but actually thought, he's brought a lot of attention to our Campbell's soup brand, and this is fantastic, and maybe more people are eating Campbell's soup because of Warhol. So I suppose it's that contrast between, you've got a huge artist that's actually, and has got this kind of foundation behind him that now they can pretty much do what they want. So I suppose for me that kind of taps into this whole idea of these kind of huge corporate companies that you're kind of referencing in the exhibition, like with the Katy Perry, and what do you do if you're kind of an individual that doesn't have that kind of stance or status? How do you kind of get past that? So that's me.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, all three of you. So there's probably a lot we can go forward with here now. I'm not even sure where I'd start. So I'm not sure why the computer's doing that blinking. Let me just plug it out and plug it back in for a second.
The copyright police from the EU.
Yeah, they've heard about this presentation and now they're coming to get us. Okay. Yeah, so there's a lot that we can talk about, but I really want to start by kind of bringing up display at your own risk. So, because I remember you were talking about that, and so I'll get up an image of the project first. And so, as Lisa was saying, it's by two artists, Andrea, Wallace and Ronan Deazley, who were here for the panel discussion when it happened in Leicester, but sadly couldn't make it today. And yeah, so they basically they've taken the photos from the institution's websites and printed them to scale. And what's interesting to me about that is, well, the images that have been made available, some of them have like watermarks all over them, and some of them are really low resolution. But for me, when it comes to the technological side of things and how that's changed how we do that, well, really, a lot of us have very high resolution cameras within our pockets. And being the digital native that I am, I can't quite remember a time before, like, going to museums a lot and not having a phone or having something. But yeah, I do remember, if you even remember Game Boy cameras, at one point that was the most high resolution camera in the world. Digital camera at least anyway.
Animated stickers, come on, it was pretty good.
Yeah, it was all right. But now, the Nokias, they had sort of okayish imagery that you could get. But now our phones can take almost print quality images. So first, I would like to ask you, like, in your time working in museums, has people can now take photos in a lot of museums, but has that just been because, I guess, the institutions have given up, or is it? It could be, and maybe I don't know, or if they recognise the value of, like, people taking photos and being able to put them on social media, and I know that you still have the issues when it comes to, say, Warhol, but in your experience, I guess, has there been a change in people being able to take photos, or has the stance always stayed the same?
Yeah, I mean, I think people have probably always taken images, but my feeling is when you tell people not to take images, they probably take more images, actually. Because when you tell people not to do something, they're like, oh, right, I can, So, and I'm guilty of that as well. I've sneakily taken some images of artworks that I probably haven't, meant to when I'm in a museum. But I think, as the technology obviously has got better and better with phones, I mean, I think institutions definitely recognise the value of social media, and I think they are encouraging people to take photos of works. I think it gets into more dodgy ground where people are videoing, actually. So we ask people not to video in the museum, and just take non-flash photography, because flash photography can kind of impact kind of works on paper in particular. But yeah, I mean, I haven't.
And also, one second, Francis, I'll come to you in a second. But like, because another interesting point that you said as well was the sort of, well, if it's, as long as it's for commercial usage, or is it for commercial usage? And I know that, for example, if you go to Icon Gallery, they make you wear a sticker and a signed piece of paper, like, or at least they have done in the past. Like, you can take photos as long as it's not for commercial usage, but in a way, how can you tell at the time if someone's going to use that commercially? Like, I might take the photo and put it up on Flickr, and then someone else uses it commercially, or someone walks in with an Xbox Connect scanner and secretly takes a scan. At the time, no, we don't know what the intention is, and then suddenly it's on BBC News. Again, like I'm thinking. How can we, or how can the law, or even can the law predict and stop that, or is it just going to be kind of like a runaway situation? Francis, I think you have a thing that maybe you want to say.
A couple of things. I think what I'm really picking up, and I really respect the institutional perspective as someone who's worked in and does work in large organisations. I know the challenge involved, but I think what really struck me is the permission culture and how it chills you, because I've had dealings in the public sector where people perceive a legal risk or a threat and don't do something, and I think that's, to me, that's quite sad, because in one way, because the thing around what would be the consequence of someone filming? Okay, it's annoying for other patrons, I get that, and the flash, but when we talk about art, why do people want the original? It's about the authenticity, it's about the connection, it's about saying this is a limited print. And there's a really interesting book called The Curve by Nicolas Lavelle, who's a consultant, video game consultant. We talked with the creative industry more generally. And he says that you're fighting a losing battle, social media, people taking photographs, that is the abundant. What you've got to focus on as a creative is what's unique to you, the experience, the connection. And I think the same would apply to the museums in Birmingham. Or also, I'll come back to the public money. It's publicly funded, so the photographs arguably belong to all of us as residents, so maybe it would be appropriate to have a Creative Commons license. But the point about the artistic merit, if some Wally kind of wants to record it, walking around, documenting their life, does that take away from the value of the art? Not necessarily, because what really that person could sell, whether it's the institution or the individual artist, maybe is the more personal touch. Here's the limited version which I didn't put out into the exhibition, or here's the lovely hardback coffee book edition that I'm going to sell to you. And yes, you can achieve the same lovely booklet by photographing these and printing them at home, and that's good bully for you, but it's almost like the bragging rights, and this is what this book talks about. And if you focus on those people in the same way as Apple focuses on the high end, the people who've just got to have the phone straight away, it doesn't really matter what happens at the commodity end. And I just don't know, I just feel like you could end up chasing your tail and being the kind of like the fun police on it, when institutions, artists themselves could derive so much more value through those kind of fostering those personal connections. So I could rip off Antonio's work, but because I've built up a relationship with Antonio, I respect him, I want to support, that's probably worth a lot more than Antonio berating me if I shared something in the wrong way. And I'm deliberately playing out extremes, not necessarily as much room for subtlety, but do you know what I mean? That the Warhol estate, they can make their money through selling high-end prints for people who want to put them up. The thing around the photograph is just profit maximization, so they're almost killing the goodwill and the community.
I wanted to, I just downloaded this image from Google. It's low res on here. In fact, it's so low res, and that probably speaks to the exhibition as well. This is basically a load of people taking a picture of the Mona Lisa. And what I like about it is that they still see value in the photograph that they've taken, even though it's a copy. And lower resolution, not the authentic, but it still can, I guess, evoke the same emotions and response, seeing the image, especially that they have taken it, that's their authorship. So, it's a copy, but it's not necessarily an imperfect copy, and for that I'd like to bring in Nikolai, because, of course, you scanned Nefertiti, and it's incredibly detailed. Like, if you haven't seen it, we'll get to go upstairs and look at it afterwards. And it's like, it's like it's theft, but then it's not, because the original's still there. It's a really good copy, so is it the same? Should the institution care that you have taken it because you haven't? So, what for you? how do you feel with the idea that maybe like is it a copy or is it authentic? And yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I come back to your question just to the on the museum issue. Like, I mean, they are best practice already. Like Rijksmuseum, they are releasing a lot of data, and they achieve exactly this. They got famous and they got a lot of attention because they are progressive in a way, and they are not losing by this. Like this is like a more paradigm change. And the pressure of the digitalization, and you mentioned in another way as well. Like it's a paradox. Like we are like Tumblr. It's the best example. Like there is no like, and it's good in a way. Like all the images from old artists, from living artists, from new artists, from non-artists. Like all these images come together on a certain level and got democratized in a way. And this is something new we should face. And I mean, I understand absolutely, and to be talking you as an institution, or to you working in an institution, like we love museums, like in our work, like we are not against museums, like this is, and the pressure is right now, and it feels already so urgent, like to play in this economic game, and there's a lot of economic pressure, and you have to position yourself. And as we observe mostly in the German public institutions, they actually don't know how to act, and they are more like they are looking for new ways. And there we came in, as Anthony mentioned, with the Kinect, Microsoft Kinect, and I understood your question like you can read it like in the news, like it's not possible to achieve such a high detailed scan with the Kinect. I admit, but it's more about the narrative, and to like for us like to question this interpretational sovereignty by the museums, and to bring up new narratives, or like there are all the possible narratives out there combined will you can't observe them, like even the so many pictures from Mona Lisa, and in most of them you have even the person standing in front of it. Like it's more like this. It's a phenomenon. It's still it's already digital photography, but this comes from analog photography now. When this the index quality of a photograph. I was there. I was here. And you could go on with this, like what does it mean to a person to be photographing themselves and then reproducing themselves, and how this refers to the self-image, which is an image in your mind, and juxtapose an object over there, and how transform this your self-perception somehow, but this will mislead maybe on a copyright yourself. Should you restrict yourself to copyright yourself somehow? But this would be a bit freaky now. And so what we claim to do with the Kinect, it's more like looking into a future where this will be possible with even the smallest device or smallest phone. So even 3, 4, 5 years.
Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, I was thinking, because I love what you did, you know, and I think maybe the issue, I mean, if you phoned me up in my office and said, I want to come in and 3D scan, I don't know, Lucifer in the round room, I'd be like, oh, okay, that sounds good. So I think, and I don't have a problem with it, because as you say, it is going to happen, people can do it. And I actually think it's okay. I think it's all right to do it, and I think maybe the issue was why the museum got so angry is because you didn't ask permission. And it is that permission. I mean, they could have just gone, oh, no way. But maybe, I think there is something about asking permission, actually, because it's, it's almost like, the filming in the museum. The reason why we don't want people film it is because they're going to get other people in the shot. And there'll be other visitors who don't want to be in a film, who don't want to be in someone's YouTube video about, oh, look, I'm going around the, the tea room, and isn't this a nice sculpture? It's actually about, respecting other people's experience,
Which is what I said. I said for the reasons given, which is the experience, and actually that comes back to the connection with the art or the experience. Yeah. But I'm saying copyright, I think what we find, particularly online, copyright is expanding to cover a whole range of things. I don't know if you guys followed the story about a YouTube gamer called PewDiePie. He's a bit of a an idiot to say the least, and apparently one of those classic people says, I'm not a racist, but I just like to say racist things on a fairly regular basis. But hey ho, the video game community are actually saying we're trying to use copyright to bring him down to end his livelihood. Now that comes into fair dealing or fair use as the American phrasing, which is slightly more generous. But regardless of what he did, and I said I'm not here at all to defend him, I think he's an absolute Burke, and he seems to have been a Burke for many years. The idea that somehow, right, we no longer like you, you're no longer in, the permission culture has been taken away, and they've fostered this personality by giving him permission to record the video games that he talks over, brilliant. That concerns me, because the example that you just gave, Nikolai, around subverting notions of ownership and authenticity and colonialism, what if it was critical of Birmingham, and I work in a big public institution where it's about global reputation, but if I wanted to do something challenging about the architecture, and I'm not going to get sign-off, and that concerns me, and you can see that in music. James Brown didn't like rap, but rap was built on his breakbeats, and it was built on the breakbeats of his drummer. Drummers didn't like James Brown because he didn't pay them very well. All these contested grounds. So if we were saying hip-hop doesn't happen because James Brown doesn't like rap, well, do you see what I mean? And that concerns me.
I think if it's constructive critique, though, I think,
In what respect?
you can't...
What does that mean in terms of the law?
I just think, not every institution is going to say, oh, you can't do that because that might be slightly criticising us. I think you need to give them a chance and say, well, I don't know, I work with contemporary artists all the time, and I'm not, I just think, I don't know, I just think maybe institutions are can be a bit I don't know, people kind of look down on them and think they're these kind of huge, scary places, but actually maybe they're a bit more open-minded than you might think.
Well, I think the point that I like what everyone was talking about is more like the weaponization of copyright, because in order to utilize it as a weapon and destructive force, you have to again understand it somewhat. And for me personally, and sort of like how I feel with some of the works, it's the institutions, whether that be museums, corporations, at least have some more resources in order to try and exploit that. I.e., they might have lawyers and they might have money. And actually, that's going to bring me on to the next art that I'd like to talk about. It's got a name which is called it's an emoji, and so I can't pronounce emoji because you can't. But it's by Christopher Meerdo. It's called Emoji for Luke Toymans, and it basically centers around a court case in 2015 from Catherine Van Giel versus Luke Toymans. So I've got the two works up here, and just a very brief explanation. Catherine Van Giel is a Belgian photographer, and she took a photograph of a Belgian politician, Jean-Marie de Decker, and then Luke Toymans, who's a very famous painter, used this as the basis of his painting, which is the one on the right. And it's clear that is taken from that, but it's like the transformative nature of it. It has enough of the artwork being changed for it to then to be considered something new and original, or is it a copy? And I did a workshop about this yesterday, and a friend of mine, who I presume actually might know the photographer, who's quite defensive, was saying how it is a bit of exploitation. And I can almost now see his argument, because, well, Luke Toymans is was a really famous artist. Like, he's had exhibition at the Tate and long history of being an artist. Whereas Catherine Van Giel, it isn't completely unknown, but does not have the same status at all. And there is sort of an argument that, well, he can try and get away with it because, well, I'm famous and you're not, and I will see you out of existence. So, so the work then that Christopher Meerdo did to try and, address this was to basically invite the internet to make their own transformative works out of this work. So I'll just bring this up here for you. It started in 2016, so I'm having trouble finding it. It started in 2016 and basically just invited the whole of the internet to do something with it. There we go. So you can almost see here like some of the images. In fact, where is Luke Thomas in this one? He is in there somewhere, but here's one where the image has just been changed, and like here you go, it's a bit of a GIF, and I can see in some ways the transformative nature of this. So even that one's just a remodeling with a different person. Here, glass is falling down onto it. If you know that meme, it's really funny. If you don't know the meme, it's still really funny. And what I really like about this project, and again, it's coming back to some of the things that we're talking about here, especially with your dealings with Andy Warhol exhibition, is that these images still exist online. Whereas Luke Toyman's was, he was sued, he was ordered to no longer display the infringing artwork in public, and if he did, he would get a fine of €500,000. No one here has faced the same fate. No one of the, I think there's like maybe 100 or so of these remixes online. And yeah, they're still somewhat derivative. They haven't been transformed completely into something new. So none of those people have faced any consequences of their actions. And there is possibly an argument to be made that that's because, well, we don't have any money. And you as an institution, for example, it's easier to pinpoint Birmingham Museum and Art Gallery if there's an infringing case, because they can, like Warhol Estate could go after you, or whoever else could go after you, because you're an easy target and the assumption is you have money. We all know there's cuts to Birmingham services, but we won't get into that. Yeah, so whereas here, again, the internet users don't have the same thing. So, and it gets into, and at some point I'll go on to the next artwork anyway, does it only really become an issue when there could be money involved? So again, going back to what you're saying with James Brown and hip hop, like again, hip hop artists have been sampling since before I was born. You know, it's just part of the culture of the
40 years this year.
Sorry?
40 years this year, 1976.
Nice.
It started out in the South Bronx.
So yeah. So it is just basically part of the musical genre, and it is, at least the cases that I've seen, it has only been when a musician has enough money and is getting into the charts that someone begins to care. So again, like yourself, you're an artist. There are many artists in the world. You're well known, but it's like now that it's getting media attention, it suddenly can become a case that they might have more of a desire to then go after you to take it back, because they might assume that you're going to make a profit out of this. So yeah, and
just on that point though, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you.
I just wanted to say it's also they have to know about it as well. So depending on how kind of visible you are as an artist or an institution, that is a point. It's like, are they going to?
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. It's another meme. Yeah, so it's are they going to?
Are they going to find out about it? It is about visibility.
But coming to the weaponization, so content ID on YouTube, the copyright holders who are often not, the big entities who have inherited the legacy estates, for instance. So the presumption, as you say, you can live in obscurity, but actually, if the automated scanning and the EU are talking about bringing an auto filter at the point of upload, so that will potentially apply to any significant platform. I think 10,000 users or more. So that's going to catch those ones, and I think that this term is called robo-copyright. It's not going to, frankly, give what size you are, and it could be pulled before you even have a chance to argue your case. So, as I said, I don't want to come across as someone who is from, let's say, the pirate party and anti all copyright. I'm a very reasonable person, I like to think, but it's about the balance, and if we're talking about fair dealing and fair use, there's not a chance. I'd actually say that this is an example of parody and criticism and review, critique, which would be protected under copyright, but because people don't understand the law, because it is so murky and it's being misused, people say, that's just ripping off the photograph. Actually, that is an example. I did it to Amber Rudd. She came out and said, real people, well, it was almost like a Kanye West moment, real people don't care about security and encryption. It was kind of that. So I just took her Creative Commons licensed image from the Parliament website and put that slogan up, so memed it. It hasn't taken off, surprisingly. But the point is, YouTube would just think, hey, that's a picture of Amber Rudd. Get rid, or not YouTube, Flickr, I should say. So that's my concern. You know, that you don't even have your chance to contest those notions. It's just a pull. So, but yeah.
Nikolai, I'd like to ask, like, just on the point about, like, now that you're in the public eye, because of your art history and the other Nefertiti artwork, I don't know, has there been any cases where, even that museum, have they come after you in any way?
No, they. But we are actually in the public eye because we intended to be there because of two reasons. Because I mean, it only works when somebody reuses it or remixes it, and on the other hand, like if there is a case, a law case brought up by the museum, then it shouldn't be transformed from a legal perspective to a political case. So we need to be somehow in the public with it. So it can't be hidden behind the walls of a court. So this is why we launched from the beginning on in German newspapers when we exhibited Nefertiti in Egypt, in Cairo, for the first time actually. Immediately at the same moment we launched an article in one of the biggest German newspapers. So we are safe on this side because our argument was like data is and correct me if data is non-tangible, so you can't possess it. So this was our argument. Like we got consulted from lawyers. So
you can get lawyers to tell you.
Yeah. And but there were several points I saw some because I mean what you brought up was hip hop culture, and this talks much more about cultural appropriation, and of course these are linked to copyright somehow, but aren't we talking about like these are how you can say this? These are blurry borders, or these are soft, like quality arguments. We can't argue on, and the law, the legal framework should go after what we decide as a culture, like talking about. By definition, culture is what we agree. No, we come to terms. We create terms to agree on something. So this creates a culture, and then the legal framework should fit into what we want them, what we want the legal framework to, or what our cultural opinion is. So our collective opinion is.
It's quite interesting that point about the culture and the law. Actually, if you want to act in different ways, it's very difficult. So New York Public Library recently has been digitizing its archive and took the decision to release everything as Creative Commons 0, which is as close to public domain as you can get. And despite making that, I think quite a very kind of brave stance on the examples that you gave, Nikolai, things which are many hundred years old, and they're saying we look after these things, we're custodians, but we do not own them in that sense. And they struggle to get legal clarity on this, so despite having his CC0 written on them, like watermarked on, cases can still come out of the woodwork on this, and I think that's the concern. I don't think anyone's disagreeing on the idea that copyright is a useful tool, like a lot of things, but it's not necessarily always the answer, and the fact that it defaults to this, and we were talking beforehand about everything you produce online is automatically copyrighted, life plus 70 years, and I think most people in their day-to-day dealings, and I say when money comes into it, maybe that changes things. Most people are open to sharing, and more than we think, but our legal system, and whether that's the wider kind of neoliberal project to make everything about market transactions, but it's very hard to even give it away and be different. Immediately, you put something out on Twitter, life plus 70 years for that tweet. It's not that good. And I maybe want someone to build on it, and you know, we need some of these new tools so that the default option is maybe more openness, but with appropriate protections when it makes sense. And I come back to this point about the layering, and I think that's how culture is made, if I understand it correctly. You know, we rely on common resources like the alphabet, you know, in order, and then it's the expression, how we use things. Music, it's about the notes, it's the chords, and we are going down. You mentioned blurring. I don't want to bring up Robin Thicke, another person, but the blurred lines, you know, it's the mood of the Marvin Gaye track, or it's a disco track, it sounds like a disco track, it's got a cowbell, brill. if we want to go after every cowbell, we're going to have a lot of trouble in the 70s particularly.
Exactly.
So, you know, a lot of mistakes were made that decade. But, you know, we need to figure this one out. And where are we going down this route? And come back about, it's not about a payday forever. It's about the incentive to create in that moment. I would say the fact is that Nefertiti, if I said that correctly, was created in its time. The incentive was there, whether that was the pyramid system, you know, the system of royal rule, incentivized the creation. We don't necessarily need a second incentive. But yeah, digress.
Thank you.
Just drop that bomb in there.
I think I want to talk about...
you can edit that. There was a point there.
I think I want to talk just about one more artwork, because, again, we're all artists, and it still does come a little bit back to the weaponization of copyright and then this sort of hierarchy and exploitation. But I wanted to bring up Nick Briz's artwork, Diamonds, green screen version. So here is a picture of it. So I'm going to explain that very briefly. Basically, I'm not going to... I won't ask, but basically
Pop
there's...
up the volume.
Sorry?
Pop up the volume.
Oh, I'm not going to play it. We're going to have a look at it upstairs afterwards. Oh dear, sorry, it stopped. It turned off. So basically, in 2012, an internet aesthetic called C-punk emerged, which was basically a little bit like kind of internet aesthetics, Windows 95 graphics, very lo-fi, and it was good. I like it. It's all right. And what happened was in 2012, Rihanna did a performance on Saturday Night Live against a green screen, and in the background was these C-punk visuals. And bear in mind, C-punk was born from people like just in their bedrooms, like really amateur artists. And everyone got really annoyed that she had used these aesthetics in her videos because they felt that it was somewhat like a cultural appropriation. And also without consultation, so like without asking, not necessarily for permission, but just consulting them, saying, how can we do this correctly? Or even, can we employ a C-punk artist to do this? And as far as I can tell, no one from the C-punk community was contacted. It was just them taking it. And so in response to this, basically Nick Briz, who's the project coordinator, shall we call him, he invited the whole internet to just remix that performance. He green screened it, and then everyone was able to put their own aesthetics onto this. But he does note, if you will pick up a program afterwards, you'll see that he's got a quotation from another artist saying that, well, we're all really involved, like this whole mutation process where we take something and then are inspired by it and mutate it into something different. This is a process that we are all involved in, whether that be me, an artist, an institution, another artist, or a campaigner, an open rights campaigner. All of us are involved in this mutation process where we take from someone else and they take from us. So I feel that copyright doesn't really allow for that distinction between it's okay if it's Catherine Van Giel, but not okay if it's Luke Toymans, or it's okay if it's me here, as long as I don't make any money. And I know that it's a complicated scenario. So maybe as a way to sort of wrap up what we're talking about, like, firstly, as an institution, like, does, or someone not necessarily representing, but coming from one.
I am the institution.
You're the institution. But is it like, again, bearing in mind that now everyone is walking in with basically copyright infringing machines. You can do a 3D scan with your phone, not incredibly high quality, but you can do a 3D scan with your phone. When can we just do away with these restrictions, or like when will the artists, or can we expect artists to care less about this potential for infringing, or is it something that we just have to keep clamping down with the laws and make the laws more stringent, like more strict even?
I kind of think that, because copyright is there to protect artists as well. So, if we acquire, a work by, I don't know, Jeremy Deller or somebody, and, someone wants to use an image of that or to kind of film that work, then, it's our duty really to go and check with the artist, are they happy for that work to be shown in that way? You know, if you want to crop a portrait and, you know, only show half the face, then actually that's a bit of a problem, isn't it? Because you've produced that, you've painted that work, and you kind of want that work to be seen properly. So I kind of feel that, you know, as a curator, you know, and thinking about copyright, I'm there really to kind of make sure that the artist or the artist's estate, you know, that their intentions for that work are being carried through, you know, in the way that it's disseminated or displayed or shown. So, you know, copyright is there for a reason. It's not just a hassle or a kind of, you know, a fee-making kind of entity. It is there to protect rights of the artists, and that's, you know, we should care about that really.
And I completely agree with you. And asking you, sorry, go on.
No, I just wanted to respond directly on this, maybe, if I may. We brought up the idea of, and I can't give answers. I mean, this is just there's, like you talked about, like weaponizing copyright, and then we have to think about who is weaponizing it, like, and for what purpose. So if in the last project we approached the museum, actually, the Naturalistic Museum in Berlin, and to ask for data, to access to the collection, and we asked even for destructive sampling, and they were agreed to this, like from these fossils, we wanted to make 3D filament out of it. Long story, it doesn't matter so much. And they found out about the Nefertiti egg and who we are, the bad guys, and they closed the doors in front of our face. So it was like, okay, so we have to deal now with a new situation, and I missed the point that I wanted to by talking about this.
Glad it's not just me.
Yeah, it's more about, and a few weeks later, I came across in Google Arts and Culture, filming the whole environment, bringing these dinosaurs back to life, like with skin and all of this fictionalized science, which paleontology strive to be strict science, but it's the most fictionalized science we have, actually. And we don't learn about climate change or something useful by looking at dinosaurs. This I got proof by paleontologists. We only know about like utility value. We only gather from looking at microorganisms in geotime. So there's only to this. So the dinosaur as a symbol. So Google managed to get in, possessed all the obtained all the data, and were invited by them, and then it was incorporated by a huge multinational. So, and local artists are not allowed in the museum. So this is kind of, we have to talk about, like, for what purpose we use copyright, and who is using copyright in which direction. So.
Yeah.
And Francis, any sort of final remarks in response to that, or otherwise?
Yeah, I think just coming back to the balance and our willingness to sort of question the received wisdom. So I think I always come back, copyright benefits, I think all about the rights holder, and think who's behind that. So it may be the canny artist who has kept hold of their rights, or it may be the artist's estate, or it might be someone who the artist sold their works to when they were really desperate for money. George Clinton, Funketeer and lover of illicit substances, sold all his back catalogue in the 70s sometime and is broke just by being one of the most sampled artists. So I'd come back to the point who benefits, and not to dismiss the purpose of copyright, but just keep that in mind, that it's the rights holder and it's not always synonymous with the artist or the creator. So I'd say that, and then also think about the direction of travel. I mentioned that the EU currently is somewhat secretively developing new copyright law, very much favouring the publishing industries, particularly the German publishing industry, which has been lobbying for what they're calling a Google tax. So again, think about who it serves, and the fact that it seems to be a one-way direction towards privatisation and corporate interest over the public domain, because again, for new art and new culture to be created, we have to be able to mix things, and where the balance lies is always going to be contested. But the example of Disney is quite instructive. Disney, it wasn't really Mickey Mouse who made its name, it was being able to access all the public domain stories around Snow White, Cinderella, I'm trying to think of other ones, I'm not sure.
Beauty and the Beast.
Beauty and the Beast, good example. And people think of those as ancient stories, but actually they were only a generation or two behind Disney. They were in common circulation. What about the artists today saying, you know what, I want to flip the script on The Little Mermaid from 1990 and do something quite subversive? Forget about it. So that's the change. And what does that mean for our culture? It's easy to say, well, there's plenty of other ideas, but actually it is about that mixing and what happens when we lose that, for what gain. And then just finally, I think it's interesting we're talking about it is murky and it is complicated, and how do we feel about giving over the decision-making process for this very contested cultural issues, appropriation, for instance, to a machine. So the content ID for YouTube, which will say that's a snippet of a song, and you have to forego 100% of the revenue. Are we comfortable with that kind of future? Or do we want it to be more of a human enterprise where we can have those discussions and say, you know what, I didn't like the way you subsequently appropriated my work, but my work still stands, and you can go off and have your fun with it. But the photograph that we showed, that still has validity and that still has integrity. So yeah, just food for thought really. And I think we owe it to ourselves with any public policy. You should just keep looking. There are always benefits and costs. So benefits to one group in society or one set, there are consequences as well, and think about where we're going. Thank you.
Cool. So I think we'll just sort of wrap up for now. And yeah, I'm really thankful for everyone for coming here and just like presenting all these different viewpoints, because one thing I try to make sure with this exhibition is that it isn't anti-copyright. I'm not in an anti-copyright stance whatsoever, because as we've heard, it protects the rights of artists. And as an artist myself, I want that to be protected. I don't want my work necessarily being used out of context, but can that be stopped? What happens when that does happen, in the example of the Luke Toymans and Count Van Giel? And there's just so many, what I feel myself with copyright is that there's so many exceptions and it's complicated. And that's really, for me, where a lot of these problems lie, is that copyright, even though you posted a definition there was then the next page, which was the million paragraph long definition. And I think in order to even try and get anywhere closer to there being a fairer system which benefits everyone, the institutions, the artists, the rights holders, there needs to be a lot more clarity on what copyright is and what it isn't. It's not just appropriate, it's not just about reprinting, is it about appropriation and so forth. So I think are we anywhere close to understanding what copyright is through this whole talk? We will soon find out. So I just want to thank Francis Clark, Nicola Nelles and Lisa Beachamp just for coming down here and talking. We're going to take about a 10-minute break, and then we're going to invite questions from everyone. And also thank you for coming. Thanks so very much. Round of applause for everyone.
Yeah.